This is familiar territory for anybody that's used LightWave 2015 or before. But you can actually change that using this material pop-up. And if I change it to principled, now it's got a lot more controls. Or I can flip it back to standard. Now, behind the scenes, this is all nodes. So you can actually see there is a principled BSDF node. Here's the standard node, so I can actually close that. Open that. Put that out of the way. So these are the same. This is the same data. We're just presenting this node's interface on the main UI. So if I actually change that, you can see it's the same control. So this gives you an easy way to manipulate the node data for this first control, for this first node. So whatever the first node is that's plugged in, if I switch it with principled now, you can see now the surface editor is showing the principled node. And same for, any of these, skin. And so now skin's the primary one, the first one connected. Put it back to standard. And that's what this pop-up does, is that if it doesn't have a node of that type, it adds it. If it already has one, it uses what's there, so you can go back to a previous node. Let's close that. So if you want to get advanced, you go into the node editor, which has always been the case. You want to go advanced, go into the node editor. Well, now you're always going to be using nodes. You just don't have to go into the node editor for most things. You'll notice this has T buttons, but principle doesn't. The standard node is meant for bringing in existing assets so that they will look as close as possible to the previous look. But if you're starting new content from scratch, you'll want to use principled. Or if you're really familiar and you don't want to use principled, then yeah, you can switch it to standard and you got your T buttons. So you'll notice one of the things that's not on this surface editor that is on the old one, and that's the preview sphere. I think Steve will be covering this more, but we do have a new preview sphere. It's available via this preview. I'm getting some weird... I have a feeling that's OBS causing problems. Let's turn that one off. Okay, so now we got this one. And this will show whatever surface you have selected, it'll show you, and you can actually, unlike the old preview sphere, this one you can make as big as you want. So you can look at, you can also use a different object if you like. So we can change it to something like that and even rotate it around. All this you couldn't do with just a basic preview sphere. So this is the new way that we're previewing surfaces instead of a tiny little ball on the surface editor. In here's the main list for your objects. For anybody who's not a LightWave user, this would be your list of objects, and then on that object your list of surfaces. And you can holding down control, you can click multiple. So you can see now, because I've got a standard and a principled selected, I get a standard node interface and a principled node interface, and I can scroll those. Now I've got multiple standard materials selected, but I only get one standard node. And that's because any of these changes here will get applied to all of those materials that are using the standard node. So right now they're all pretty much set to the same. If I click this one and let's say give it luminosity, and this one doesn't have luminosity, and select them, now we can see, because there's a difference between the two values, it shows it's mixed. But I can select that and put 50%, and now if I go to each one, that one's 50 and that one's 50. So it does support multi-select editing. Put that back. For even the colors and the bump, I think the bump map as well. if I had more principled, it'd be the same thing. Change this to principled. So I've got this standard, that principled, that standard, that principled. So this principled node would be controlling the data for that material and that material. Shift can also do a range selection. So I've got that one selected, hold down Shift, click there, and now I've got this range selected. And so that's controlling 2 nodes, that's controlling 2 nodes, because it's a multi-selection. And if I had, you know, all the different materials in here, I'd get one of each. And there you can see it's quite a few. These are more tool. They're still material, but they're for mixing materials and things like that, so they don't provide their own interface. You have to go into the node editor, the node editor, to change what they're actually doing, which I can show that easy enough. So the only setting on this one is the alpha, and it's the alpha between 2 different things. So I could pipe in that one and that, not into there, into there. So now I've got the standard material and the principled BSDF, and I don't know where the surface is, so I can't really look at it. But if I put a alpha of 50, then it's going to do a 50-50 mix of these 2 materials and pipe that input, you know, pipe the result, whatever it is, into the surface. Or we can just go back to standard. You can see it reconnected. But it maintained these connections, so if I needed to, I could go back to Material Mixer and get that result again. Looking for questions, okay. Set this back to VPR because it looks nice. So I need an object that has multiple, I need a scene that has multiple objects to show the next thing I want to show. I think that would be, oh, I knew which one it was. No, that's one object. Sorry about this. Oh, I saw it. My content path is not set right. It was just in here. Nope, that's Genoma presets. Mecha there. It's this one. Okay, here we go. It was in cell shading. That's what's throwing me off. I didn't think it was a cell shaded scene. So we've got multiple objects in here. So each object has its own entry in here, and you can collapse it. They default to open, which is different from 2015 where they would default to close. But you can quickly close them all. Holding Control toggles them all open and closed. Holding Alt. So let's say I have them all open. Holding Alt will open just the one you click on and close everything else. So that's a little change that we've got going for managing this list of things. So Control will toggle them all open and closed. Alt toggles everything closed except the one you clicked, which will toggle open. And I can even, I should be able to then even do a range selection across different objects. And I can save presets, which is something that's to save it to a specific file, or I can save it to the preset shelf, which isn't open. There's the preset shelf, and you'll see in previous versions you'd get a render of the preview sphere, which you can still do if you have the preview sphere open. Just floating. So I can actually do, save the preset shelf, and I get the preview ball. But if I don't have that open, it'll actually just give me this OpenGL view as the thumbnail for my preset. And anybody who doesn't know what preset is, I can double click that and it'll load the settings onto whatever surface I've got selected. So if I go to this, actually, is there any change? Yeah, so this one's 10 on the color. If I go over here, double click this, it's now 10 because it loaded all the settings from this surface, because this is the surface that the preset was made from. It'll load all those settings, including the whole node network, if there is one. It'll load any of the data for that surface onto the surface that I've got selected when I double click the preset. So we can also search, which we could search before, but it's a bit better now. Let's see. So let's say I want to find, let's see what's something good to look for. UM. So because there's lum, I'm not sure what lum stands for. There's these lums and lum ball. They appear in the search. You can also do regular expressions in there. There's a special character you have to start with. And then you can use regular expression syntax. And I think we have that in the documentation on some examples to actually use for the search. Edit by scene. Here's somebody asked, edit by scene. Edit by scene is not here. That was intentional. It's not an oversight or a bug. It's not here. I'm not going to talk about future stuff, but we know that people need it, or people want it at least. We do have a stopgap, and that would be, we can see that we have metal black. We have metal black there, metal black there. We can do this select by name, and it'll select all by name, and now I can be making changes. This would give you essentially the same as edit by scene, because internally that's all edit by scene was doing, was anything with the same name, regardless of what object it's on, anything with the same name would be edited. So if I made this change, because this is all the same, it's not saying mixed, the color here, it doesn't say mixed, it would have those dashes. That tells you that's a mixed color. But if I set this to 25, then all of these surfaces will get that change, and that gives you essentially the same as edit by scene. The list is going to be a bit bigger, but that's for some reason that one didn't select. The name must be white. Oh, because it's backwards. That's metal white, and that's white metal. So that's why that one didn't pick up the change. So there's only one surface in here I could do this with. But this also, you can do more than just by name. If you saw in that list, you can also do same material, which is going to select all with the same material. You can do the shading model, which I haven't shown the shading model yet, but that's over on this tab. So you can see, here's the material, and it's showing you what material is on each surface. And on shading model, excuse me, the material column changes to shading model and shows you that they're all using the cell material shading model. I'll touch on those in a bit. So continue with the select by. So there's material and shading model if they both match, and name, material, and shading model. So let's select this one. Now we know this one will match by name, those three. If we go by name, material, and shading model, they are all using principled and they're all using cell. But if I set this one to photoreal, go back to the shading and material. Now it doesn't select because they don't match on the shading model. If I go to this one, then this picks up both because they match on all three: the name, the material, and the model. So we have different ways of selecting surfaces in bulk that should give you some of that functionality of the edit by scene. So Any questions? I'll keep an eye on the chat. It's over on this other monitor, so that's why if I'm looking that way, that's what I'm looking at. So the shading model, that's going to be, if I understand correctly, I don't program the shading system. I do mostly GUI and some plugin work and bug fixing on quite a bit of different areas. But if I understand correctly, the shading model is internally it's the integrator. Anybody who's familiar with other render engines, they may call it the integrator. This takes the different samples. It's a plugin, and it takes the different samples that are generated and integrates them into the final color for the pixel, if I'm understanding that correctly. And so, based on how this plugin works, you can actually change the look of the surface. So let me, if I shift click on something, so that should be that surface. So let me check. If I set it to, okay, it's that surface. I want to select something that we can easily see. Oh, I'm not in VPR. I'm trying to shift click on the surface. This looked so good, I thought it was VPR. And I was shift clicking on it because in VPR, you can actually shift click on a surface to have it select that surface in the surface editor. So now that I've got VPR, I can shift click. Now I know what surface that is. So just to give the streaming software a bit more CPU cycles, I'll just set that back. So this was the surface for these joints here. So now if I set that to pink, yeah. So that is the correct surface. So let's go to the shading model, and I can set that to photoreal, and you can see now they're getting smoothly shaded. They're not cell shaded anymore. And I've got different options for how it looks, and actually I probably should have that. I can set limit. Let me get VPR going. Okay. So let's let that refine a bit. So I can turn off things like glossy reflections, which I believe makes the reflections blurred when you have roughness. Because if a surface isn't rough, it's going to be like a mirror-like finish. So the reflections wouldn't really need to blur at all. But if you have a little bit of roughness and you want them to blur, then I believe that's what that's for. We have online documentation now, so there's actually I can open that if you have questions, or you don't have to be a owner. You can go look at the docs right now. It's docs.lightwave3d.com to look into these features more, to get more information about them. So I can actually do a real quick search. Principled BSDF. If anybody has any specific questions about that. So this gives you about the principled and how the different values change the look of the surface. And that's the UI for it. So all in depth, and it's editable. So if there's a bug, we can, or a typo or something, we can fix it without having to wait for a new release or anything. So we have two cell shaders. We have this one, which is pretty basic. You can, it's because of the way cell shading works, you have these different segments on the shading, which now you can see because I made this one really big. Now the shading on this, it's got a lot of that white zone and not much of these other zones. If I go the other way, then we'll see that it's now got a lot of this darker zone, not too much of the other one. And I can change, the color for these. Oh, this is the manipulation for this gradient. That's the specular. You also get a specular gradient for that. Oh, now I just dropped a new key. So that's the first cell shader model, and then we also have the Sublimation cell shader. Now you see it won't have anything here, but we've got this options button, and you click that and you get this classic UI. This is a new UI system that we've added in 2018. Let me real quick diverge and check messages. Yes, John mentioned that he likes that it's now lux and not percentage, and that is true. On the lights, it's measured in lux. You'll see it at LX. It may look like a K if your font's too small, but it's LX. And then for anybody who's wondering how the two related, for most of the lights, if it was 100% in 2015 or before, it would be pi. It'd be 3.14. There's some lights where it's double pi or half pi, and we actually do the light conversion. If you're loading a 2015 scene in, it will actually look at the old percentage and adjust it to the new value, including if it's an envelope, as I recall. So you'll see an old light that's 100% will come in as 3.14 lux. And anything in between. So if you had it 50%, it would be half pi or whatever the correct value is. So we do try and import assets and convert them as much as we can. Just catching up on the chat real quick. Okay, so I'm all caught up on the chat. Back to this Sublimation shader, you'll see that it's got a different UI. It's not embedded in the panel. This is a classic panel, but we can still adjust values, specularity. So the Sublimation cell shader, as I recall, this actually came from Sublimation, which is a Japanese anime studio that uses LightWave, and this shader would have existed as a shader on the shaders tab in the old surface editor. That old shaders tab is gone, as you can see. There's no shaders tab, but they have this shader, and so we've converted it to the new system and included it in LightWave 2018. So this is a production use. This actually came from a studio that uses LightWave, as far as I know, and it's got a lot more settings all over the place, and it's got these. Let's see if I can get something that we can actually look at. Actually, let's make a big change. So, yes, there we go. So now I've got some really harsh, ugly colored cell shading going on. Actually, not that bad. But it's got these fixed zones where you can actually adjust these values, and I think this is the equivalent settings to that gradient. So this is the numerical equivalent of how to use the gradient. Use base color. I think use base color requires that you be on the standard node. Let's test that out real quick. Ugly color. And then I have to click options on this and use base color. So now it's using the base color to drive the shading, which is what the standard the other cell shader does. It just uses the it doesn't pull the color. This shader actually does pull the color. That's why it has to be the standard material. It actually pulls the color from this node. If I change this, well, not Sigma. I think it's OBS is causing this pop-up to not behave correctly sometimes. So if I change that to principled now, it's caused this to not work because it can't find the color. But our other, the regular cell shader, if I go to this, it's not specifically pulling the color. It's just, it's how it integrates the samples, and it does that via this gradient. So it's just a little, and I think that is noted in the docs, that you have to use the standard material if you're going to use the Sublimation cell shader. So that's that. We have smoothing still, of course, the smoothing threshold. This is multi-select enabled as well, so if I have all this stuff selected, I can unsmooth it or toggle it back on, and that'll do it for everything. And then we've got whether it's double-sided or opaque, which you'd have to check the docs what that means. I can't remember. Sorry. Any questions? You'll notice that we do have the info display. It's not quite as big, but it is there, and it tells you. You'll notice if I'm on the material tab, I can see in the column what material I'm on, and I can't tell what shading model it is, but I can see right here it's on cell. Now we could add a third column, and we may do that. I'm not making any promises. It's been mentioned for sure. I can say that at least. This is wide enough, and I can actually make this panel quite big, so we would have room to make it bigger if needed. So yeah, you can look at how many polygons a surface. Let me make this smaller so it's more reasonable. We can see VPR. Oh, that looks nice. Even with my ugly colors, that looks pretty cool. So we can see that it's using the cell shader, and for this one, yeah, we can see it's using Sublimation cell shader. Check for questions. Yep. Okay. So, presets. I mentioned presets. Presets are good. This is, unless there's any more questions on the surface editor itself, the shading stuff could be talked about, a whole meeting and then some, about how the shading system works and how each node works and how they behave, and bringing PBR texture sets in and using them and hooking them up. Now you notice there's no T buttons here. So if you wanted to put a color on something, you do have to go into the node editor, and you can see, maybe VPR is using a bit, yeah, okay. I have the layout process, I have it like set to low priority because I want to make sure OBS has as much CPU as it needs so the stream isn't dropping out, because that would be bad. So, if things look a bit slow and sluggish, it's my system. It's not LightWave. So, like I was saying, I keep getting sidetracked. Sorry about that. So there's no T buttons on these nodes, but you can add it should be here. You can add an image node and hook it up and use that to map an image. It's a few more steps, but you have a lot more control over it, because now you can mix this with other nodes and things like that. And we do convert, so there is a conversion process. If I go ahead and clear this scene just to lighten the load, I have an object that I made just before the meeting started. That's a basic object with just a simple image on a ball, and this is a 2015 ball because I saved it from 2015 so that it's in the old object format, because we have a new object format. It still ends in LWO, but internally the data is in a different structure, so to speak. So we can read old objects, but 2015 can't load new objects. We do have a plugin on the plugin database. And I got sidetracked again, but let me finish this. So you can see it loaded in. Use the stamp because this is the old. It's old surface data. So it's going to use the standard material for backwards compatibility with that old surface data. And you can see it's got the T button there, and that's the texture I set up. It's just this seamless image, and that's how I set up the texturing in 2015. So it maintained that, and there's T buttons. But we've got the ability, if you want to start converting assets to the new system to take advantage of the improved look and speed that the new system gives you, you can right-click. Anytime I get this menu, I'm right-clicking in case you were curious. So right-click, go down to Convert, Layered to Standard Nodes. Now you see, now I can't edit that. And why can't I edit that? Because it's now got, so that's my standard node. It's now got, down here, it took that T button and duplicated it into a node. So this is the same T button data from before. And if I uncheck that or disconnect it, you can see now it's live again and the T button is right there. So I didn't destroy it. It's still there, but it's not going to be used because now it's going to use this input. Anytime anytime one of these grays out, it's either because it's a feature you can't use yet, like refraction index, you can't use that yet because it's not transparent. As soon as it's transparent, now you get these controls editable. But if I say pipe alpha into specularity, now specularity has disappeared, well, it's grayed out and disabled because it's telling you something is going to override that. So don't bother trying to control it because it's not going to use that value. If I disconnect it, now it's editable again. So our conversion process, when you right click and convert to layer to standard nodes, and what it means by standard nodes, it's got the standard and it's using these nodes. I have to differentiate between that and the other conversion that I'll show in a minute. So, and it's got this node here because this was the basic color of the surface during the conversion. And because the way the T buttons work, it takes that base color and puts the texture over top of it. And so to duplicate that, it puts this color in here, pipes it into the background of the T button of the classic texture, and then pipes it in. So that way, if this was pink, you'd get a pink node here and this texture. So if I had this set at 50% or something, you'd get that 50% mix of this pink with the other thing. So it's to maintain the look. It is adding these nodes for a reason, and it's to maintain the look of the material as close as it can. Let me clear the scene again so we can start fresh. And let me load that object once more. And this time I'm going to convert it to principled nodes. Now what this is going to do is I'm going to end up with a principled BSDF node. And this is the new way of shading things. This should be it is the new default. If you're creating new objects, this is the default material that'll be used. So over here, get things adjusted. We can see that I've got still my T button is there. I've got this standard because it does two conversions. First, it converts to the standard material because this is what, when the object was loaded, this is the node we got. The principal conversion does the same thing. It converts that T button to a texture along with the basic color, and then adds a principled node, and you can see it adds that where it makes sense. So it made sense to connect that color into the color and the luminous color, because of the way luminosity would work in the past. To get that same look with a principled BSDF material, you would use that same, whatever you're using for color, you'd use it for the luminous color to maintain the look. Now once you've got it set up with principled BSDF, you can then, disconnect the color and have it just, or have it luminous with a different color. So now you've got more granular control over things. You'll notice we have an OpenGL input that takes a material, And in that case, you would use the standard material. And this is only really handy if you're using something like Octane, because the Octane nodes don't usually show up in OpenGL. So its material nodes, because they don't really show up in OpenGL correctly, as far as I know, I don't have Octane, sadly. But to still have a viewport that you can actually look at and manipulate and know what's what, you can pop a standard node in there and use that just for OpenGL. So it won't render. It'll just be called when it's actually doing the viewport. So if I disconnect that, you can see I've still got my texture on there until I disconnect that. So now I can have one material for the viewport and another material for rendering. And so in this case, and you can see the surface editor just looks at the one that's used for the render. So this disappeared. So that way you could have, I double click that. So you could have it look completely different in the viewport than the way it's rendered. So I've got that pink now. So if I wanted to flag something as, this is something special, it looks different in the viewport, and have it render correctly or in a completely different way, I can do that using these two different inputs. So the viewport will use OpenGL, and the renderer will use the main material input, and that could be from a third-party render engine like Octane. So if anyone was curious why that's there, that's what that's for. And if you have it disconnected, then it'll use what's in the material if it can, if it makes sense. Any questions? Please post them and I will read them and then try and answer them. Check real quick. Library thing. The library thing is very cool. I'm sure it is, but which one are we talking about? Because there is load save library. Now what a surface library is, each object has a surface library. It's a list of surfaces and all their data. So if I have, let's go back to something with a lot of surfaces. I think this had a lot of surfaces, at least on one object. Okay, yeah, so this leg layers. So each of these objects has a library, and I can save that in bulk. So if I go save library, it's giving me the surface. So this would be leg, and that. So that's all the. I think I saved the library. So then I could do load library. Now load surface. So let's go here. Save surface. This is going to save just a single surface. So let's save that surface. And then if I could go to any of the other ones. Yeah, so that one's green. Okay, and then this one's not green. So if I go right click, load surface, I can now load just that one surface. And I believe it supports multi-select. So if I select both of those and load surface, that surface, so that one's green and that one's green. So you could, if you have a surface set up exactly how you want it, but then you're like, you know what, I still want to tweak things, you could save that surface out. You could even save it as a preset if you want, but you could save that surface and it's like, this is awesome looking, and save that out. And then if you end up making changes and you're like, I don't like those changes, let me load that surface back up, you can do that. Same for the library. So now that I've got this, so now that we see it's got a bunch of green surfaces in there, I should be able to load library. Now I can do it in 3 different ways. By index. So it's like whatever the first library is in this, whatever the first surface goes to the first surface. Second surface is the second surface. Which, if it came from the same object, it should be fine. As long as you haven't gone into model or added or deleted or renamed anything, it should be fine. The first to the first, second to the second. So by index, that's what that is. By name, it actually matches them up. So if we look at the name, so it's going to look for cable small 01, look in the library, and then in the object library, cable small 01. When it finds the two that match up, it'll load just that surface to that surface. If a surface in the library can't be found on the object, that's where by name and append extra surfaces comes in, because then it will actually create those new surfaces. Now, in layout, there's not going to be any mesh using them, so they would disappear. But in Modeler, you can do that. You can load and append, and now you have all these new surfaces that you can actually apply to parts of your mesh. And because they're being used by parts of the mesh, they'll be preserved when you save the object. So if we go, let's go by index and choose desktop. You know, I think I may have clicked the wrong button when I saved it. Because, leg, an error has occurred. Because I think I loaded the wrong type of file. But this gives me an opportunity to show something. Now that was user error on my part, and I'm going to have to debug that because that shouldn't have crashed for sure. But we now have a feedback agent. So I have this crash. And I won't go through these steps because I don't want to put my email on the stream, but you'd put in your data, the details about the bug, a description of the bug, an attachment. Now you can see here on the attachments tab, it has the mini dump, which is it's information we can use. We can match that mini dump up with the build data and actually see what line of code it crashed on, or where, or what it was doing, if it was a memory problem or what. Or at least try to. Sometimes the mini dumps aren't that helpful because of the form of the crash. If a driver crashed, we're not going to have any data on that because that's not our code. That's a mouse driver or something. So once all this data's attached, you can click NDA if you don't want that viewable by other people. It'd just be internal to the team. Once all the data's in there, you don't need to change anything on that, so don't bother. Once it's all in there, this will open up. You can click the button and it goes up to our system and gets logged in, and you'll get an email back telling you that it's in the system, and then you'll get an email when we fixed it. So this is the feedback agent. So if you get a crash or you have a bug or a feature request, use this, please. But I'm not going to use it right now. Reopen. So, and you don't have to wait for a crash. You don't have to wait for a crash. You can actually get to that through the help and then submit a bug report, which won't have an attachment by itself because it's not from a crash. So you'll have to actually attach something. It could be a screenshot, or if it's a specific object that has an issue, you can attach that. Same for feature request. Submit a feature request, and now it's the feature request mode. And it's the same, what type, description of the feature, where it is in the system, as best as you can gauge. Any attachments, if you've done it's like, I want a button right here. We'll mock it up so we know what you're talking about. And then when it's completed, upload it. Attachment size, try and keep it under 15 megabytes, please. Just because it has to go through email, not when you hit complete, because the old feedback agent, you had to put in all your details for your email server. That was ridiculous. This doesn't use that, but at some point it does have to go through an email system, and so it does need to be below a certain size. If the content's too big, give a link and we'll sort out how to archive it on our end. So that's the feedback agent. Let's get back to the library real quick. Oh, I just want to see if that is working. So let's right click, save library. Okay, library, leg layers. Yeah, I think I may have done this the wrong thing, because when I thought I was saving the library, it had the surface name, and that should have been a clue. So let's save that. Let's make some changes so we know it actually did. So let's copy this surface. Copy, select all these, paste. And we've got different options for pasting. There's paste the common stuff, which I believe is this stuff, because this is common to all surfaces. Every surface is going to have this stuff here. And you can see it's not even part of this node list, or the data for the node. It's below. So if I actually have, not to get sidetracked again, but if I disconnect that, you can see now there's nothing connected, and I still have all that data. So that's the common data when it comes to pasting. So right click. So there's paste the node graph, which would be just the nodes, which basically, all of this stuff and everything in the node graph, but not the shading model. Or I could paste just the shading model. Or paste, which does everything. So now I can see I've got everything. So now if I right click and load library, let's do by name. Now we get it. And now the surfaces are back to the way they were. So that's the load save surface library. Let me check the chat real quick. Sorry. Yes, Ben just reiterating. Please use the feedback agent. It's been really helpful since we got that up during testing. So there's that library. I think, yes. I've mentioned preset. I'm going to jump ahead and then go back from what my list is, but you can't see what it is, so you don't know. Presets. So, yes, we have presets. Skin. So anything that's using this new preview ball, those are gonna be the new presets. So actually, I can take that, load the settings, and now I've got, I don't know where that is on the thing. Actually, didn't leg. Was it that one? Yeah, where did it turn yellow? Oh, it's a tiny little part. Metal white. And let's make it look like that. Ooh, that looks kind of cool. Let me see what that looks like. So you, as I said before, you just double click. You have to make sure you have a surface selected. Select a surface, and I believe it supports multi-select. So you select what you want the surface or the preset to load onto, and then you just double click the preset. You have to make sure you double click the icon or the thumbnail, because if you double click the name, it is not working. Oh, this is a read only. That's why. If you double click the name, it does. If I go to, and you can see it's read only because of the little lock, because that's in the install folder. So those ones you can't write to because of Windows. That's not our problem. That's a Windows. Windows did that. So, but this user workspace, and if I double click the text, now I can actually rename this and change the description, which this description is what you see at the bottom. Oh, don't load. I want to change it. So now, yeah, testing. So that down at the bottom, you can see the description for it. So double clicking that will load. Double click the thumbnail to load it. Double click the text to change the name, which is a paradigm in quite a lot of things. But that's double clicking the name is actually new in 2018. So that's one of the preset shelf refinements that was made. You also notice this thing. That's new. This is a hierarchical toggle. So with it unchecked, so it's not blue, so it's just button color. This is the way this pop-up used to look. Is you'd have each of your preset locations. So I've got built-ins and this user. If I change it, toggle that on, now I get a built-in entry and all of its preset folders, and then I get this user entry and then all of its folders. And the same goes for the move to. Oh, OBS, why must you do this? No. Maybe I felt no. It doesn't want to do it because my CPU is too slow. But you'll get a pop-up. So this pop-up you get here, you get the same pop-up in the move to and copy to. So yeah, it just doesn't want to do that. At last pop-up. So when it's in flat mode, you get the same thing you're used to in those move to copy to menus or pop-ups. And then if it's in hierarchical, you have a hierarchy here and you have a hierarchy in these ones as well. So in containers, that was another besides bug fixing, there was some crash bugs in here because nobody thought to try 6,000 presets until we were in beta on this, and someone tried 6,000 presets and it crashed. It wasn't our crash, it was Windows. It was a Windows problem that was causing us to crash. But we worked around it, and now you can have a lot more than 6,000 presets. So, these custom containers, we used to have just a single custom container location. That is now edit location list, and this is one of the other new to 2018 custom preset locations. So I can put my presets on a network drive. I can mark those as read-only if it's a group of presets for a specific project, and it's like I want everybody on my company to use them, but I don't want anybody to write to them. I can set them as read-only when they're added to the system. So let's go ahead and add a new location. Let's just put it on my desktop. That's a bad thing to do. And so presets, and so now I've got this preset and workspace. So now I can go ahead and add a new preset there. So we can see it took a while because it needed to update and get the VPR viewport. Also new is this add new preset, and we needed that because Viper, not VPR, but Viper is depreciated and not functional. It's gone, to be blunt. So, but Viper was how you'd make a lot of presets. For instance, the textured environment, image world, things like that. The only way to make a preset is you open up Viper and you click the add preset button. Well, with that being gone, we needed a way to still make presets. So you can see now that I've got texture environment enabled. If I actually go back to the surface editor, you can see that the preset shelf follows whatever the active context is. So because I clicked on the surface editor, the preset shelf is going to switch to the surface presets. If I go back to the effects panel, then texture environment is the active plugin, so it switches to the texture environment presets, which I can load any of these, and it'll load onto, you can see that changed, and if I go in here, I've got that gradient. But that's, let's just make a quick numerical change, so we can see that, yeah, it made a preset. So you can see there's no add preset button in here, so if I want to create a new preset, I need to be in a writable, which I can actually toggle that. You can see now it's not writable because of the little lock. I can go back, make it writable, and now, or not read only, however you want to call it. Right click, add new preset, and it's going to take that viewport. So if you were doing texture environment, you probably want to have just a view of the environment, because that's going to be the thumbnail. You can also right click that and replace it with an image or with VPR, which is what it's already using, is the VPR viewport image. So we've got this preset now. So if I go and pick that one, we'll see it doesn't have 42 there. And if I go back to my horrible one, we can see now it's got 42. So it loaded in that preset that we created by clicking add new preset. And you can do that. You can even do that from the surface editor. I think I shown that. So add new preset, and that pulls the preset data from the whatever registered that context. It pulls the data from it. It's more of a pull system versus a push. Even over here, it's pushing the data. It's telling it to pull it, basically. And I can open the shelf from that. And even the surface preview, which again, Steve will be showing more. It's got a preset thing, load from disk, which manipulates what's selected here. Saves disk, save preset shelf, open preset shelf. It's basically the same menu as this one. But this is surface oriented, but you can still use that for making other presets. So because it's just a viewport, so if I go add new preset, now I get that as my texture environment preset, which may be good, maybe not. And it doesn't just work with texture environment. It works with it'll work with image world as well if you've got settings for that. It doesn't work with everything because the plugin does have to say, I want to have presets available. So it does have to register into that system, but anything that does register into it, if you're in that context, you can make a preset for it. Which actually is, I want to see what this looks like. Ooh, that looks quite nice. It's like a hammered copper. I'll buy that. So this is the edit location list. It used to be just one location. That was it. But now it's multiple locations. You can just keep adding more locations. This default save location, since I've set that as my default location, if I go to the surface editor, so wherever you click add new preset, that's where it's going to put the new preset if it's writable. If it's a writable location, otherwise it'll shift. So if I actually go to automotive, well, this is read only. It's got a lock. And go, I can't even add new preset because it's a read only. So I flagged this one as my default here, and if this works as I recall, when I tell this to create a new preset, it goes to the place that I've set as my default location, which is presets workspace. So even though I was viewing this folder, this user location, because I flagged my presets, should have named it something different, which why don't I do that? Watch it fail. Oh, it worked. Desktop presets now. Misspelled, but it works. So since I have that flagged as my default save location, anything new that I create that's not via this right click, because right click goes wherever you right click, because that's intuitive. But if it's being created by something outside of that, just save to preset shelf, then it will go to the default location. You can only have one default location, and it will save the new preset in that default location. So any new things will go into that location, regardless of what you're actually looking at. What old I'm assuming not no. Well, you can try load. I'll read the question for anybody who's not on the chat. So what old 2018 presets can we still use in 2018? So like a 2015 preset or 11, whatever. I'm assuming not nodal ones, or am I wrong? Nodal ones would probably be better supported. Now, we do, as I mentioned, there's the surface conversion that takes place when old data is being loaded. As I recall, the same process takes place when old presets are loaded. The preset structure hasn't changed, but the data in there is old data. Well, it's not old. It's the previous version's data, and I believe that we do a conversion on that. If not, that's probably a bug. Yeah, I think we do convert it. So I don't have a lot of time left, but I would try that out. But things like nodes, if you're using a lot of third-party nodes, you're going to have a problem because a lot of third-party nodes need to be recompiled, or not rewritten, but adjusted for the changes, because the node API did change in a breaking way. So anything that was using the 2015 or before API does need an update. It's a lot of things we were able to maintain backwards compatibility, but the node editor, well, not the node editor, but the nodes themselves, these guys, the way the system talks to them and they talk to the system, it's a different interface now. It's not a user interface, it's a plugin interface. It's different enough that we weren't able to maintain backwards compatibility. So any third-party nodes, you're going to need to get the new versions or not use them. You'll get load errors when it's loading. You shouldn't crash, but you'll get like this node not found. So anything that's using a shader, over on the shaders tab, that's not going to come in at all because the shaders tab is just completely gone. We don't support those shader plugins anymore because of the way they work. SRF files, same thing. If it's an SRF file from 2015, it should be going through that conversion process where we update it. We make a standard node. We hook everything up as best we can. The node data itself didn't change. The structure on the data, it's just the nodes, the API that the nodes use. So if you were using the standard collection of nodes, most of those should come in. I don't think we retired very many of those, if any. I think the biggest changes would be on the shading nodes because it's a different system. But if you're using like Delta or Conductor, that should come in just fine because we still have a Conductor node, we still have a Delta node. The data is different, but we support that old data on load, and then when we save it, it saves out as the new format. We have, I mentioned it. Oh, no, that's the wrong window. Let me go like this. I mentioned the object format, and we have a plugin. Now you can export from, I don't need Surface Preview. You can export a model. Export, maybe just export. No, it's just the scene from save 2015 object. So that would save out the object, but the surface data is going to be new surface data. 2015 can't load that new surface data, so you're going to get errors. Like principal node not found. It's like, well, yeah, because that's 2018, not 2015. But on the website, we do have in the plugin database, and right now it's the top entry. It is a LWO3 loader because the old format was LWO2. The new format's LWO3, and this loader plugin, it's not for 2018. You put this in your 2015, your 11. I don't know how far back it goes, but it definitely works in 2015. Let me drink some liquid. So you put that in your previous version of LightWave, and you can load in your 2018 objects. Everything mesh related should be there. VMaps, UV map is VMap. So all your vertex maps, all your points, all your polys. The surface assignments will be there. So like this part of the object was named this, or it had this surface. That will be there. What won't be preserved is the actual surface data, like what settings it was using. Even if you were using the standard node, it won't preserve that on load. I think at most it brings in the color. At most. I'm not 100% sure because that was a while ago I wrote that. If there's bugs or feature requests you have on the LWO3 loader, use the feedback agent. But what you won't when you're loading it up, you won't get those errors because it's a plugin that knows. I'll just ignore that data. Oh, it's a PB. It's the principled node. I don't care. I'm ignoring it. So it will silently disregard those things because it's manually loading the data in. So, and you don't have to go through an export process. So you can have your whole library of 2018 objects and load them in to 2015 just fine, except the surface data is not there. Now, you wouldn't want to keep saving the same object in 2015 and back in 2018 because you're going to keep losing your surfacing data unless you're making a backup to an SRF file. which you can always do. So we do have some backwards, a little bit, I think that's forwards compatibility via that plugin. The old version can use the new data object format. So that's the preset shelf improvements. I will show. I have very little time left. One of the driving forces to the preset shelf improvements was a specific plugin tool set, and you may see the tab up here, OD 2018, and that is the Origami Digital Tools for 2018. It's Oliver Hotz's. Hopefully I possessivized that name correctly. So if I go to IES test, so one of the things that, no. So we can see this is just a plain, let me pop VPR on, oh, that might, no, this might crash, this has been fixed, but I'm not using the point release, I'm using the, this is the same version you guys could be using right now, so I'm not using my developer abilities to use a super secret new version. This is the same 20.0, 2018.0 that you'd have. There's a bug though, so be careful if you don't have a file on here, clicking parametric info will crash it. That's been fixed. I'm safe in saying that's been fixed, so don't worry about it. And we should have the patch out soon. I'm not going to give a date, but soon. So, as I was saying, a lot of the preset shelf improvements came about because I have to re-add the plugin. The menu is there, but because I crashed. Damn it. Okay, add plugins. That one. Let me change the. Actually, I can just. So, Oliver has created a lot of presets. Or a lot of plugins that use all these different things. He's really been hammering away at the at our systems, and they've been improving because of that. So this is one of his preset systems. He's got multiple preset systems. You can see anything with OD is his. So there's scenes, there's objects, fiber effects. You can now have fiber effects presets, and they're smart fiber effects presets. So you could do a whole meeting on just his stuff, and I think that's what we're planning on doing for the next LA users group. And because that's a hot topic, I'll try and get that video up as fast as I can. Instances, so you can have instancer presets and mix and match them. So you can have a preset of grass, and then add a preset of flowers, and you'll have the grass and the flowers. But the IES presets, I can show those right now. So right now I'm in the ODIES preset shelf context, and in this user, I've got all of these presets. And you can see that the thumbnail is what the IES file actually looks like, because IES files, they're files that describe the shape of a light. So each light bulb will look kind of different depending on how it's designed. The housing and the way the element is inside the light. You can see it just like that one versus this one. So you can actually, okay, I'm not going to EPR. So you can double click these, and it'll actually load that IES file. I can pop this over here. Just double click, and so now I get a preview of it, which is darn close to what it looks like. Can I zoom in? Yeah, there we go. So, and that's just one of many. So, there's that light, and there's rendering, and that's the thumbnail we give. And you can see it's loading this data into this light. So he's got this preset system of IES lights. I completely recommend anybody who's going to do anything with IES lights, get OD Tools 2018. This alone is awesome. And then there's like hundreds of things in his, oh, I've got 2 of these now. There's hundreds of different scripts he's got, but the preset ones are really awesome. So, there's one last thing. If there's any questions, I'll try and answer them as quick as I can. Oh, I don't have the light selected, I think. What is selected? No, I think I broke something. Anyways, and you can even do a search on his, so you have to rebuild the database. But yeah, if there's, you can do a lumen check via this pound lumens and then give it a range, and it'll actually find all the IES files within that range.
Jeez.
Actually, let's try that. Let's see if it works. Let's do exactly what it said. Search. Oh, I guess there was nothing within that range. Or I did it wrong. I only got this installed the other night, so I haven't had too much time to play with it. But just being able to double-click an IES file or an IES preset, have it loaded onto all the selected lights, that's really nice. Especially for ArchViz, where you've got all the lights and the client's told you, oh, all those lights are going to be this model light. Here's the IES file for it. Yeah, it doesn't want to find anything. Bulb. Now we're just playing around. So, one last... Oh my god. 30 people are watching. So, one last thing I will demo is layout, view, and modeler. This is the only thing I'm going to touch on in modeler. I think Steve's going to be doing some more modeler-centric stuff. I want to load something from the content scenes. So I will use the plane because I like Cowboy Bebop. Okay, so let me go ahead and get this. Oh, that's camera perspective. So let me make that a bit smaller. Modeler. Where'd modeler go? Ah, it opened on the wrong window. Okay, reopen it. Okay, there we go. Because I have a second monitor to my right, I can't do the thing where I just drag it to the window and it just like half sizes it. So, okay, now it's gone weird. Okay, there we go. So there's this layout view. Come on, OBS, stop screwing up my system. Okay, so there's like top view, so on and so forth. Now we have layout view, and you can see as I'm rotating, if I actually get the model in here, it's more impressive. Camera. I know I'm running over. I will. Oh no, I have to do it. Okay, so I can't click and drag here because it's getting this viewport position and the view on the model. It's getting that data from layout via the hub. So you have to be running the hub for this to work, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So you can actually go into the camera view. Yeah. So you can go into the camera view, and if something's slightly off model from that specific view, you can set that to camera view. Go here, you'll be in camera view, and you can actually make modeling changes. So I'll just destroy that. So I made that change, click back over here, and now it's got that change. Come back over here, undo that change. Come on, undo. And then come back over here, and it's got the change undone. So I can, can't rotate that one. So, yeah, and if I change, well, not that one, to the different orthogonal views, it does the same. Not that one. So, and it does zooms as well, rotation. So I'm only manipulating the layout view here, because I can't actually change this one because it's tied to the layout one. So whatever layout's doing, here we go. You'll notice that this one on the left is differently colored than this one. I believe that's a color space issue, because over here we've got the color space presets. Anybody who's used color space, this will be my final note, and then I'll wrap it up so Steve can get on with his meeting. So one last note, because this is a change that people should know about if they're used to the color space changing, color space preset in 2015. We used to set in the default, so if you chose sRGB as your preset, we used to set picked colors to sRGB. That was done for backwards compatibility with non-color space aware assets. Well, because there's so many shading system changes, we decided 2018 is the time to make this change, and that is to not set picked colors to sRGB. This means that all your color values are linear color values now. So what I mean is, with the old setup in 2015, you were baking sRGB into your color selections. So you pick a color, the values for that are sRGB values. They're not linear values, which means any other software that uses linear values, and I don't mean the way that looks on the screen, I mean the actual numerical values. Anything that's got linear numerical values, you can't, they're not interchangeable. You can't take this color, this value red, this value green, this value blue. You can't take those numbers and copy them into layout, and vice versa, because we baked sRGB color space into our actual numbers. Not anymore. By picked colors being linear, the actual values of the colors are linear values, which when they're white doesn't really make much difference. But you'll notice that the color picker will look kind of different. There's more pinching going on in here. It's not as smooth of a gradient because it's linear values now having color space applied. If I changed, I have to close this, change this to sRGB, it's going to behave the way 2015 did, and you can see it's not as pinched, but now you've got sRGB baked into your colors, into the color values, because you're looking at the colors wrong, basically. So that was a change, and anybody bringing in old assets should know that those color values are going to have sRGB baked in, unless you were using this change, because you could manually change that before, and some people were doing that, so that their color values were linear values, and they would only get the color management applied when it was being displayed. Something I didn't get to cover was the new render properties. That's Control P. It's on the render tab, render properties. This is where all your render settings, your render frames, begin, start, image viewer settings. This is for the render engine. If you got a third-party render engine, this is where you choose it and open its properties or options. These options here, if the third-party render engine wants to use them, fine, but for the most part they're going to be specific to VPR. The render tile size, because we're now tile-based, it'll render in little squares. That's where you'd set that. The global illumination, you toggle that on and off, and set the type, which there's just one right now. There's the settings for that. Volumetrics, the enable volumetrics. I think Steve might be demoing that. If you still want to use hypervoxels, you can, but you have to enable use legacy volumetrics. And it's either or. You can't have both because of the way the systems are so different. You're either using the new volumetrics or the old volumetrics. So if you got an old hypervoxel scene, it should load up and actually have that checked, use legacy volumetrics if it's 2015 scene with volumetrics in it. But if you've got hypervoxels in there, it's like they're not doing anything. Check, see if this is checked or not. And don't be surprised when your new volumetrics like OpenVDB disappear. So then we've got your buffers. This is how you would choose what buffers you want to actually render, and then yeah, this is. I need another hour, Steve. No, I'm joking. So this is where you would check whether you want the alpha, and the output is where you'd save it. And be sure to click the save, because anything that's set to render in here, and I can multi-select, toggle those all on. Now you can see they're in here, but it's grayed out at the bottom because it's not set to render. Just like you have to set these to render, you have to set these to save. I misspoke earlier. You have to set these ones to save if you actually want to save it. And now once it's clicked to save, you can actually edit the things. And we use this new tag format. There's this tag button, and you can see what the tags are, and you can actually like what eye is it, and you can put the tags specifically where you want them instead of it being hard coded to. Well, this is where we think the frame number should go. You can have the frame number at the beginning if you want now, but it defaults to the buffer name, which would be this, or if you've set the custom name. So that's no alpha 2. So it would be alpha 2 because it's using the buffer name and it's got a custom buffer name. So it's going to use that custom buffer name when it comes time to save it. Multi-layer will save everything that's set to render. Not if it's so you can actually have nothing in here set to save except multi-layer, and it will save everything that was set to render into an EXR file, which does not support color space. It's linear right now. Everything's linear in there. Alpha pre-multiplied or straight unpre-multiplied. That works the same way as it did before. Use preferences output path, that would be, I'm going really quick. That would be if you had a custom and then output, actually does that have to be? Yeah. So output directory, you could set that once and then just tell all your output, which it defaults to being this way. Use references output path, and you can see now it's read-only, but you can see it is going to use that output path when it saves stuff. Or you can uncheck it and have that frame, or that image, that buffer I should say, all the frames for that buffer go to a completely separate folder. And technically you could also take the buffer name and use that in the folder. So now I've got coverage folder with the coverage buffer in it. And that's because when the tags are parsed, it's one whole string. It's not this string and then that string. It's build the string, then parse the tags. You can choose the file format for that buffer and the color space for that buffer, or the defaults, which are on the CS tab, I believe. Yes, default buffer, default final render, and it'll use those. So on the final render, you get, gotta check that, it'd be default final render color space, and then the other one's just, it's the default buffer color space. So I'm going to wrap it up. Control Alt on the GI tab of GI tab, Control Alt. Oh, yes. As I mentioned on the surface, you can use the, well, it doesn't really show much here, but these are collapsible, including the subgroups, which not everything has a subgroup, but some stuff does have a subgroup, and it works the same way. So Control, I'm holding Control, you'll have to take my word for it, toggles them all open or closed, and Alt toggles everything closed except for what you click, which it leaves open. So that works the same way because it makes sense. It does the same thing, just in two different places, but uses the same paradigm. This one can't be closed. Well, yeah, there's not much. It's not a list. It's just this one single sheet. Same for this, although there's no groups, but it's the same idea.